Good morning. It is top of the hour and would like to call COMSTAC to order. I am James Hatt, the designated federal officer for COMSTAC. Would like to welcome everybody that's on COMSTAC who's on this meeting, as well as everyone tuning in on YouTube. On that YouTube link or on the COMSTAC website, where the YouTube links are found, a couple notes for everybody just as administrative. There is one YouTube link for this morning, and then there's another YouTube link for the afternoon session. There's also a link there should you wish to add comments or ask a question. You can type it into that Google form and we will receive that. So again, welcome to everybody. I am absolutely thrilled to be here and to support this COMSTAC meeting. This is a 46th COMSTAC meeting. What a great run and what a great opportunity this is. I know the FAA and the Department of Transportation, in fact, the whole of government greatly appreciates all the advice, recommendation, and observations that COMSTAC has provided in the past. Many of those things have been acted upon or are being acted upon right now, and we greatly appreciate that insight from industry. FACA, of course, the Federal Advisory Committee, stems all the way back to Washington, D.C., or to George Washington, rather, when he wanted to get advice from outside the government. So this is a great opportunity for the government to get information from industry, and we'll do this in a public setting. Just as another note, this afternoon, the Vice President will be announcing the first National Space Council meeting on 1 December. So we are looking at an administration that also recognizes how important space is. So your COMSTAC advice, recommendations, observations are very critical, timely, and I am definitely looking forward to having this discussion today and getting your information back and helping us do an even greater job at keeping the public safe. And with that, again, thank you to everybody for being here. And I will now introduce Mr. Kelvin Coleman, the Deputy Associate Administrator for the Office of Commercial Space Transportation, to introduce the morning's first welcoming remarks. So Kelvin, if you are on, sir, over to you.
Great, thank you, Jim, and good morning, COMSTAC members. Once again, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, FAA Administrator Steve Dixon. Mr. Dixon, of course, remains committed to overseeing the 45,000 employees of the FAA in carrying out our mission to operate and oversee the safest aerospace system in the world. As you know, Mr. Dixon remains engaged and energetic when it comes to the matters of commercial space transportation, as evidenced in part by his past participation in COMSTAC meetings. Once again, he has been very engaging and offering to provide comments to this meeting. Unfortunately, he is not available in person and has provided videotaped remarks. So with that, we will turn it over to Mr. Dixon, and we look forward to hearing his remarks.
Well, hello, everyone. I am truly honored to open the 46th Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee meeting, which of course we know as COMSTAC. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you in real time this time around, but let me start by saying that there is no substitute for everyone here. The guidance and the expertise that you provide to Wayne and his team month after month after month is invaluable. And I think you'll see today that the FAA not only hears your input, but we're putting your consequential deliberations into action. Now, I want to start by thanking Charity Whedon and Karina Dries for their outstanding leadership in providing us that input. And I thank everyone on the committee for your hard work and your patience that goes into crafting recommendations, observations, and advice for the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. You know, I've been on enough government advisory groups to know the drill. It's hard work, but it's extremely important. And though you've been working hard, I'm betting that no one's bored because, as you know, this industry continues to move at warp speed. And when I spoke to you back in March, I opened by saying that it's been a consequential 6 months since the last COMSTAC meeting. Well, in hindsight, that looks like the understatement of the year. You see, since March 23rd, the date of the last COMSTAC, up until October 31st, we've seen 34 FAA license launches and reentries. Now, those included a second NASA commercial space crew who flew on the SpaceX Dragon to the International Space Station. And if we're on schedule by the time you see this, Crew 2 should be splashing down following Crew 3's arrival on another Crew Dragon. And 4 human spaceflight missions by Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, and SpaceX that among them included 3 suborbital trips, 1 multi-day orbital flight, and the youngest and eldest people to go into space, including Captain Kirk himself, William Shatner. You really can't make this stuff up, can you? Now, while the astronauts and spaceflight participants are making all the headlines, Wayne and the folks in AST have been moving at warp speed as well. For one, the AST team laid the groundwork that led to an agreement that I signed with the Secretary of the Air Force that became effective in June. Now, this agreement eliminates red tape and duplication of efforts for commercial space activities at the Space Force ranges at Cape Canaveral and at Vandenberg, otherwise known as the Eastern and Western ranges. Now, based on COMSTAC's recommendation to solicit industry input regarding R&D investments, the FAA is establishing a new research venture that we're calling the Commercial Space Innovation Institute. Now, the Institute's mission will be to keep a finger on the pulse of the industry when it comes to needed R&D investments. And you also asked us to prioritize our support for helping industry transition to the new Part 450 Streamlined Launch and Reentry licensing regulations. Now, I'm here to tell you that we've made it so. In fact, I think Wayne and his team may have set a record. They developed and published 10 advisory circulars this year. That's quite a feat for any agency, and as I said, it may even be a record. COMSTAC also requested that we consider updates to financial responsibility as our next rulemaking effort, otherwise known as Part 440. And here too, we are moving very fast. The FAA Commercial Space Team is in the process of setting up an aerospace rulemaking committee, which we're calling SPARK for short. And the SPARK will start the formal work on this rule. We're very anxious to get your input on this effort, and I understand that part of today's meeting will be discuss the work on Part 440. Now, finally, Wayne's team is also working to improve the process under Part 450 regarding the good enough determination for pre-applications. Now, this was also a COMSTAC recommendation. So as you can see, there's a lot going on, and while we don't anticipate that it will slow down anytime soon, I want to assure you that we aren't letting the speed of innovation get ahead of our ability to assure safety. That won't change. It always needs to be our North Star. But what will change and evolve over time is how we regulate this fast-changing industry so that we can embrace innovation while at the same time protect public safety. Your advice, observations, and recommendations are a key part of that evolution as this industry continues to grow and prosper. Well, thanks for listening, and thank you especially for your leadership and your commitment and your collaboration with us. And have a great meeting.
Thank you, sir. Great words. And again, want to reemphasize, there's a lot of things that COMSTAC has provided to the FAA and we are marching out on those. And I think the administrator highlighted just a few of them, but that is, again, just a few of them. So thank you for your remarks, Administrator Dixon. Next, without needing any introduction, because he is very well known to you all, Wayne Monteith, Brigadier General retired, who is the Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation. Sir, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Good morning, everyone. First off, thank you to Administrator Dixon for continuing to support our commercial space efforts. And to all of our COMSTAC members and to those joining us virtually today, the second COMSTAC meeting of 2021. Hopefully, one of these times we'll actually be able to get back together in person again. The last time we all met in March, you provided detailed recommendations on prioritizing future rulemaking, international dual licensing, Spaceport Authority, and R&D efforts. And since that time, we've been busy working on your recommendations and on doing our part to maintain public safety and enable innovation in our industry. In fact, as Administrator Dixon mentioned, since we last met, the FAA has licensed 34 commercial space operations and published 10 advisory circulars to support Part 450. That's a pretty incredible pace and a reminder of how important COMSTAC is to the success of the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. It's also not lost on any of us that you all have day jobs and your pay as volunteers leaves a bit to be desired. But you put your time and effort into making a difference, and we absolutely appreciate it. Today, I'm excited to hear about your recommendations for human spaceflight guidance and regulatory reform, Part 440 financial responsibility, spaceports, online electronic license applications, and more. As you all know, human spaceflight is literally taking off. With 4 human spaceflight missions since our last meeting, we only expect commercial human spaceflight to become more frequent. And we need to be ready for what's next, whatever that construct or framework actually looks like. Since our last meeting, COMSTAC was briefed by a number of key space officials, including General Raymond, the Chief of Space Operations of U.S. Space Force, Janet Petro, the Kennedy Space Center Director, Brigadier General Steve Purdy, the SLD-45 Commander, and the FCC. You have all put in a tremendous amount of work over the past 8 months, and your insight will continue to help propel our ever-growing industry into the future. We at AST know that we need to continue to elevate our operations and continue to be agile and forward-leaning to meet increased demands. Your detailed recommendations will assist us in meeting those goals, and again, we thank you for your efforts. I would also personally like to thank our COMSTAC chairs, Charity Whedon and Karina Dries, as well as the working group leaders, Paul Damphus, Greg Autry, and Shanna Dale. Your leadership and passion for this industry is evident, and we appreciate everything that you do. So with that, we've got a busy agenda today, so let's go ahead and move on with our program. Jim, back over to you.
Thank you, sir. And just want to take a quick moment and introduce Charity Whedon and Karina Dries. Great leadership, and thank you for recognizing their leadership. They have done an absolutely outstanding job. And I wanted to open it up for them, or if anybody else has any questions for you, sir, before you depart the trajectory here. So Charity, Karina, over to you if you have questions from COMSTAC members.
Associate Administrator Monteith, thank you so much for the remarks. I know you'll be hanging around throughout the day and listening to our observations, findings, and recommendations. I personally don't have any questions at this time, but I do want to afford the opportunity to the members. And I see Mike Moses has his hand up. Mike, go ahead.
Sorry, Charity, that's an accident.
Good, we're testing out the equipment. I like that. Anything from you, Karina?
Good morning, General Monteith. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing for the industry, for AST. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I think a lot of folks in the industry have recognized your leadership at AST and what you've done with the team at AST to really help accommodate this growth of the industry. So I just wanted to offer my thanks to you, to Jim Hatt, and to the rest of the folks from AST on the call.
All right. If there's no one else, again, thank you, sir, for your comments, and we'll be looking forward to having you around all day or as much as you can. Thank you. All right, our next person is Mr. Randy Repchek, who is the division manager here of ASA 100. And I'd like to introduce him, and he is going to give us kind of an update on where we are with Part 450. In regards to industry, and this is something new that just came on board, and he will talk to us. And if you have questions at the end, if you want to type them into the Google, if you're on YouTube or COMSTAC members, feel free to be jotting down your questions and ask. Thank you. So Randy, over to you.
All right, thank you, Jim. There should be a presentation that goes with this. All right, thanks. Next slide. Oops. All right, great, thanks. Okay, so unfortunately, my very first bullet is incorrect. So just to make so the Streamlined Launch and Reentry licensing rule, final rule, when it became effective on March 21st, 2021, not March 10th. The March 10th was the original date, but we did move it about a week and a half later than that, as a lot of rules were done. When the new administration came in, they wanted to review the rules. So it was about a week and a half after the original date. So March 21st, 2021, it became effective. Most of you know, but just real quick, the rule consolidated 4 different parts that help the licensed expendable launch vehicles, reusable launch vehicles, and reentry vehicles, and that's all under one part now. And of course, it's performance-based primarily, and of course, a single license can authorize operations at multiple sites. The legacy regulations, I don't know how many types of licenses we had, but there's a lot. And now we can just use one license for multiple different operations. So applicants could use legacy regulations if they had accepted applications prior to June 8th, 2021. And we did have one company get their application in by June 7th. And so one company did get under the wire, and they are currently under legacy regulations. And of course, all current launches are under the current, all current licenses, I'm sorry, all current launches are under the legacy regulations right now. And so a lot of companies are still under those legacy regulations, but they will be removed on March 10th, 2026. Next slide. Okay, a couple of accomplishments. So we have 4 applications that are currently accepted under Part 450. And we have also 1 approved incremental review. And one thing Part 450 allowed for that the legacy regulations didn't is that a company could actually apply for a license in increments and phases, right? They could give us certain parts of Part 450, and we can review and approve them in increments, so that some of the early stuff that's done early in a program can be approved by us. So we do have one company that did have a plan approved by us to do incremental review. And we're also working with a few others that want to do the same thing. As far as the public engagement, we had about a year ago now, we had a 3-day public workshop. And we also had an international workshop earlier this year. And a lot of interest in this international workshop. It's really interesting. I think there is a lot of international interest in how we do things here in the United States. And of course, it's been mentioned already at this meeting. We put out 10 advisory circulars, which was a huge accomplishment. And part of the difficulty with it. We have workshops for each one, multiple workshops sometimes. And so our AC team did a great job getting those 10 out and doing these workshops. So yeah, a lot of our effort was spent on those ACs this year. And one thing I don't have on the slide I wanted to bring up is internally, we also have what we call a Part 450 review board. It's every Thursday. We sometimes don't have it, but when a new regulation hits the street and you start using it, there's all sorts of issues that come up, and this happens with every regulations. When you develop the rule, you think it's going to go great, right? But then when you fight, when it kind of hits the enemy, then you see a lot of things we have to make. We have to make a lot of decisions, make a lot of policies, and actually start making a few corrections. So we have this thing called a Part 450 review board every Thursday, and as issues come up, we try to get the management team and some of the key staff members together to kind of work through all the different issues that come up in Part 450, and that's been going quite well. Okay, next slide. So I just want to kind of walk through a few topics in Part 450 that are of interest. And the first one is I call the hazard control strategy. The key aspect when we try to combine the 4 parts into one part, what we were trying to do there was under the legacy regulations, you're either an expendable launch vehicle or a reusable launch vehicle, and that's just not the way the world works anymore, right? There's a combination of all sorts of stuff, and the safety issues that come up are not one size fits all. And so in Part 450, for every phase of flight, a company can do one or more hazard control strategies. And the 2 that are of most use, of course, are using a flight safety system for flight abort and using flight hazard analysis to derive hazard controls. And we've already seen in the 4 applications we have, there's been a couple phases of flight that it just didn't fit perfectly with flight safety, a flight safety system, and so you kind of had to go to a hybrid approach using both the flight safety system and system safety. And so far, at least early on here in the first 7.5 months, so far Part 450 has been able to handle the safety issues that come up with this industry that's always evolving and challenging us. But so far, I think it's worked really, really well because there is an answer in Part 450 for any kind of safety issue that comes up. As far as scope of license, we spent a lot of time with scope of license. Under the legacy regulations, launch began, which means our oversight began when the launch vehicle components arrived at the launch site. And we removed that in Part 450, and we try to begin our oversight much closer to the actual flight. And we base it on when the safety issue, when there's hazardous operations going on in the public. And so for all 4, I think for most of the 4 that we have currently, we've worked with the companies to choose when our oversight begins, and it tends to be close to like an initial static fire would be a typical way when the license starts for us. And so Part 450 has worked pretty well in removing our oversight for some of the industrial activities that take place well before you start doing static fires. For ground safety oversight related to that is Part 450 also allows a company, if they choose, to just allow the federal launch site to oversee the ground safety, and then we get out of it altogether. And so we have worked with, I think, all the companies that we're currently working with are looking at that. One has been already been approved to use the federal launch site as the ground safety oversight. So they don't have any application requirements on ground safety because the federal launch range is taking care of it. We still do insurance for ground safety, but we don't have any other oversight when they choose to do the federal. And also have there's a policy that also came out about the same time as the rule that allows legacy operators to do this, get the same benefit, right? They can have ground safety overseen by the federal launch site, and then we remove ourselves. And we actually have one company that just got approval for that under the policy. I mentioned incremental review, that we have one company that already has an approved incremental review plan, and we have a couple others that we're working with to do that as well. Now, as far as the means of compliance, so as we mentioned, we have the 10 ACs out. We have about, I think 17 more advisory circulars to put out. So we really are trying to get all the advisory circulars out so that for every section of Part 450, there's an identified means of compliance that we have out there. We already got one complaint from a company that says, there's not enough out there yet. And we understand that. And we are working as fast as we can to get these advisory circulars out. Yeah, so but the other thing we also have found, one issue we found is that there are certain means of compliance that have to be approved before an application can be accepted. And one thing we found already is with flight safety systems, which often uses is RCC 319 is the standard for flight safety systems, and every company tailors them with the FAA and the federal launch range. And by Port 450, that has to be approved before we can accept an application. One thing we found already early on is that tailored document is often not 100% signed off on when the application should be accepted. So we're making some of those kind of adjustments right now. Safety element approval. One thing we allow in Part 450 is a company to apply for a safety element approval with their license application, and we actually have one company already do that. High consequent event protection. A key part of Part 450 is to, instead of using containment as the approach for flight safety system, we use what's called a CEC, conditional expected casualty, to determine if you need a flight safety system, and if you have a flight safety system, when you need to abort. And so far that's been working quite well. Actually, under the legacy regulations, the CEC approach is used often where containment can't be completed. Safety critical systems. So one aspect of Part 450 is that early on, a company does what's called a functional hazard analysis to determine their hazard control strategy. And one of the outcomes of that analysis is identifying safety critical systems. I think a lot of the discussions we've had in our 450 review boards and with our companies is, okay, so now that something's been identified as a safety critical system, if you still have a flight safety system, what's that mean for those other systems? And we're still kind of working through that. We don't want to, just because something's been labeled safety critical, doesn't necessarily mean it's an extra lot of work for folks if they use a flight safety system, but still we're kind of working through some of those issues. And those last two, neighboring operations personnel and ship protection, Part 450 allows for a different risk level for personnel and on neighboring launch sites, and also a different way to protect ships. And of course, that's also what we've done is under legacy regulations, companies have been applying for waivers for both neighboring operations personnel and ship protection. And the good thing about having 450 out there is that if someone applies for a waiver with legacy regulations, that if they use the approach that we take in 450, it's an easy waiver for us to give. If you're complying with Part 450, we know it's an acceptable approach. And so we've been using the Part 50 approach to approve waivers in the legacy regulations. Okay, next slide. Okay, so way forward, we are tracking lessons learned as we go. Like I said, when you put a new regulation out, you immediately see where you could have done a better job, either in the way you word things, and so we are keeping track of things. At some point, we will do a cleanup regulation to clean up some of those things. Early next, or sometime next year, we also have what we call a technical corrections document that we'll go. It's a rulemaking, but it's only to fix technical mistakes we made in the document. It can be things like we refer to the wrong section in this. It's not meant to be substantive. It's just meant to clean up some of the editorial things we made, both in the preamble or in the reg text. And so, sometime we're kind of gathering those things as we work the rule, and we'll be putting on a technical correction sometime next year. And of course, we're still developing advisory circulars, and the next speaker, Charles Hewitt, will talk about that in much more detail. And then not related to Part 450 per se, but we're also trying to streamline the application process itself. And we're doing a lot of work this year on what we call an application portal. So we're trying to modernize the application process, so it's not all based on emails and getting documents. And so hopefully we're going to have one portal that everyone can go to, both the applicant and us, to get the application, do the review, all that kind of thing. So we're working really, really hard on that. We've spent most of the year trying to define the requirements for the portal, and now we're looking at different off-the-shelf solutions to try to put that together next year. And my last thing I wanted to mention is we do want companies, if they see a problem with Part 450, to let us know. We had a meeting yesterday with one of our companies, and they brought up a couple points that were very, very helpful. We know it's not perfect. We know we can make some corrections here and there. So in any way that Part 450 is either isn't making sense or is not working the way we think it should, please let us know. We really do want to get the feedback. Okay, that's all I had.
All right, thank you, Randy. Appreciate that. Charity?
Thank you, Randy, for that update. I want to open it up to COMSTAC members should they have any questions. I see Anne, your hand is up.
Nope, I think another another technical glitch on that front.
This is going to be a fun day, I think. Okay.
Charity, I'm happy to ask a quick question of Randy.
Sure.
Randy, thank you so much for the presentation. I know we'll get a little bit more information on the advisory circular piece, but as you know, we're just kind of getting started on the 450 regulatory process. There are a lot of companies that haven't operated under 450 yet. I'm kind of curious, you touched on it a little bit. Are there any sort of high level areas that you're seeing currently that that you're looking at potentially for additional input from industry or additional input even in the advisory circulars? Are you seeing that so far?
I will let Charles talk about the advisory circulars, but no, because we work through these issues with individual companies and their individual issues. We did have an issue with, I mentioned the CEC, high consequence protection. There was one company where there's a phase of flight that doesn't work for them, and we shouldn't have. And so with that particular license, we'll take care of it through a waiver for some. We'll fix it for that particular issue. But no, there's nothing in particular that we want to get feedback from. I do think. Well, I will say this. I think if there's anything that companies think are, it's meant to be a streamlined rule, not an additional burden rule. So if they see additional burden where they don't think it's necessary, please let us know. That's one thing we're very interested in. It's not meant to be increased burden. It's meant to be less burden. So yeah, please call us out on that if that's an issue.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm looking for any other hands up at this point, and I don't see any. Thank you so much, Randy. Appreciate your remarks this morning.
All right, thank you.
Excellent. All right. Again, thank you, Randy. Our next will be Charles Hewitt. He is my lead for developing, coordinating, revising, and publishing advisory circulars. And just want to publicly sing his praise. Over the last year, or actually starting since March, we were able to get 10 advisory circulars out. That was a huge effort, in no small part to Charles's leadership and hard work and dedication to getting it done, as well as a whole team of people. So I just want to say thank you to Charles on that right up front, as well as everybody else. It was a huge team effort. But Charles, I want to turn it over to you now to talk about where we are with those ACs, the 10 published, and where we are currently, and then where we are into the future. Charles, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Jim. Thanks for those kind words. It's truly a team effort, and we're still not done. We're still working hard on getting all the rest of the ACs out. So I think we also have a presentation for the ACs. If we can bring that up. And
It's on its way.
The opportunity to talk to COMSTAC about this. So as Jim and others have said, we did publish 10 ACs in fiscal year 2021. we still have 17 ACs to publish, and we did also hold workshops for all the ACs, and and at those workshops we requested feedback, and there's feedback forms on all the ACs that for people to send in comments or any way to make the ACs better, or if there's any problems with them that we can fix. So I also wanted to point out that all the ACs that are published are subject to public comment indefinitely. There's no 30-day comment period or 60-day comment period. The comment period is open as long as the AC is published. So I would encourage people to use the forms on the back of the ACs, and I know they're short and don't allow for a lot of material to be input into the form. So it's perfectly okay to add some attachments to the form, and you can comment on any part of the AC that is necessary. And we can update ACs at any time. There's no set schedule of when they have to be updated once they're published. So if we do get substantive comments from industry or the public, or even within AST itself, we can update the AC to put in those recommendations. Next slide. So this is the list of the ACs that we have published already. We have the high fidelity flight safety analysis, the high consequence event protection. This one was a very important one because this is a new way of doing things that is not in the legacy regulations. So CEC is a brand new thing, and so we thought it was very important that we get this one out. Also hazard control strategy determination. That's also an important one for the beginning of the license when somebody's trying to apply. Flight abort. This one it goes along with a lot of the flight termination system regulations that were in the legacy regulations. So people should be more familiar with that. Also flight hazard analysis, mishap reporting, response and investigation, computing systems and software. We did also the normal trajectory analysis, system safety program, and ground safety. Next. So right now we are working on 3 ACs to be published in early next year. So the scope of license is one that we've seen a lot of interest in. So we expect to publish that one sometime in March, and actually working to publish it even sooner than that. And then the next one is tracking. And this one is also going to be published sometime in March. And the tracking for this is really to show that it's not the regular tracking for flight safety systems, but it's more of a tracking for other purposes, like if there's a mishap and you can predict where the impacts are going to be, things like that. Then the next one is going to be the malfunction turn analysis. Malfunction trajectory analysis, and that one is goes along with the normal trajectory analysis. And then we have the rest of them. Next slide. So the rest of the other 14 that we have still to do is physical containment. This is where if you have a vehicle that can't leave the launch site, or it just doesn't have the energy to leave the hazard area, how to how you handle a situation like that. And pre-application consultation, dealing with the policy and payload. We actually broke up the pre-application AC into two because there was a lot of interest from NASA and other institutions on the policy and payload with things like when you send something and it comes back from outer space, and if there's any contamination and things like that. So that AC will deal with all those kind of issues. And then the next one is toxic hazard analysis. And then we have one on collision avoidance. And this one also has a lot of good inputs on how to work with the, not just AST, but also the Air Force who do the actual analysis and what kinds of things we're looking for and how to deal with certain situations that are maybe not as straightforward as just having a rocket if you have multiple payloads and things like that. Then the next one is going to be pre-application consultation, which is more of the process of how you apply for a license. So everything except for the policy and payload part. The next one is population exposure. And that's just in support of any flight safety analysis. It's just a methodology for how to calculate the E sub C. It goes into calculating E sub C for populations that are exposed to the launch. Next one is airspace and waterborne vessel hazard areas. This has also been a lot of interest in this. Some of it even from FAA with all the ATO, and there's a lot of people that are interested in this AC as well. Next slide. Then we're also working on probability of failure, and we do work with the Common Standards Working Group, which is made up of NASA and the Air Force and Navy and all other organizations. And CSWG right now is also working on some new methods for probability of failure. So those will be incorporated into this advisory circular. Then the next one is distance focus overpressure. And there's also been some developments recently in that topic. And so hopefully this advisory circular will be helpful for that issue. Then the next one is medium fidelity flight safety analysis. And this is for the situations when you don't need a whole full up flight termination system, but something that can be a little bit less. And so that defining what the levels are and how to figure all that out is rather difficult. So we're going to attempt to do that in this AC. And then we also have one on hybrid launch systems. And this is not really as much of an advisory circular. And that's why it doesn't have a 450 number on it, because it doesn't really meet any regulation, but it's more of a guide on how to handle hybrid launch systems and how to navigate 450 if you do have a hybrid launch system. And the next one is safety critical systems. And this one deals mostly with how to do the testing and how to define how much testing you have to do. And then next is the control of hazard areas. And then this one, we actually pretty far along, but we had an issue with the Coast Guard, where the Coast Guard is not going into an agreement with the operators. So we're working through that, and we should be able to resolve that issue at the end of this month, and hopefully be able to publish this AC. And the last one is flight safety analysis, the levels of rigor. And that one is also a difficult AC because it's very hard to see how much rigor you have to do depending on what the stage of flight you're in and what the CEC is, and so there's a lot of things that go into it, and so that's all the 14 other ACs remaining with the 3 that we're working on currently. Next slide. So we've started work on all those ACs, and there's different levels of completion and complexity, and also resource availability can affect the timing of when we can publish something. So we are requesting from the COMSTAC some feedback on what the prioritization of the AC publication should be. So which ACs you think that should be published first? And are there any ACs that you have an immediate need for? And also, are there any ACs that are not on this list that you would like to see? And that finishes my presentation, and I'll be ready to take some questions if there's any.
Thank you, Charles. Just a quick question on timeline for all these 14 ACs, and if you get additional AC requests, what is the sort of timeline that FAA is looking at completing all of this?
Yeah, we have our goal this year is to do an additional 8 ACs, and then probably another 7 on the next fiscal year. But my personal goal is to get as many of them done this year as I can.
Eric, is your hand really up? Eric?
Hey, Charles, that was for doing these ACs, like one individual AC, for instance, the collision avoidance AC that you had. About how long does that take, and how many, like with subject matter experts, do you bring them in, or what is the engagement process there?
Yeah, it takes quite a long time. We started working on these ACs a couple of years ago, actually, and so I've been juggling all the balls on all the ACs, trying to prioritize what we work on. So it typically takes about 8 months or so from the time that we finish writing the AC to when it gets published, because it has to go through. Once we finish, we do get subject matter experts. If we have them in-house, we use them in-house. We've been also using contractors. So we try to find the people that know the subject matter and get them to help us write it. And then once it's written, it goes through our management review, and then it goes to the Common Standards Working Group. And they have a lot of subject matter experts there, NASA and the Air Force, State Department, even Commerce. They all get involved and provide input into the ACs. And so, and then a couple of them, like the flight safety analysis ACs, for example, on the malfunction turn analysis AC, we actually sent that out to a very targeted group of experts on the Air Force side to take a look before we sent that out to the entire CSWG. And so, and then after the comes back from the CSWG, we adjudicate all the comments, and then we send it to our lawyers, because it has to be, it's a legal document. So we have to look at all the things, like when we say you must do something, that is tied to a regulation. And the words are very important. So we use must for things that are regulations. We use should for things that we want you to do in order to meet the AC. And we use may if it's our alternate way of doing something. And those words are very important, and they have to you have to know what the meaning is. And we explain all that in the front of the AC of every AC.
Thank you so much. I know it's a
Oh, you're welcome.
Any other questions for Charles? Okay. Thank you very much, Charles. You have a full plate ahead of you, and I'm confident and we'll be here to support you. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate everybody's support.
All right. Again, thank you, Charles. And you and your team have done a great job. And we are expecting even greater things coming up. And so we'll be asking COMSTAC for a little help on this as well, and potentially reaching out for others to assist. I just wanted to mention that on the COMSTAC webpage, there's a link that you can click on, and it'll take you to Google Forms, and you can type in questions as we go through the day. We will collect those. We're looking for questions pertinent to the discussion at the time and to the items brought up in the COMSTAC meeting. But that link is now available. I apologize. I guess it was not working first thing this morning, but it was just tested and it's working. So if you want to use that, again, it's back out on the COMSTAC webpage. There's a link there for questions. Next is Steph Earle. He is the Assistant Manager for the Policy and Innovation Division here at the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. Steph is an absolute expert in so many areas. And like I mentioned, he is the Assistant Manager. So he is helping me in a great many things. So Steph, over to you on the rulemaking, and then some questions and answers on the future plans. Steph?
Great, thanks. Good morning, COMSTAC members. So if you can bring up the slides, we're going to go over some of the rulemaking activities that fall under our division. I see they're coming up now. Oh, that's me. So you can go actually to the next page. All right, so AST rulemaking. So the ultimate place to find out where a rulemaking is actually officially underway is the unified agenda. And that's the Office of Management Budget, or OMB's regulatory, their Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs controls the actual rulemaking, the approved rulemakings for all of the agencies. And so when we apply for rulemaking, it goes to OMB or ARA, and they'll give us a rulemaking number. And once that rulemaking number is issued, then it becomes an official rulemaking. We have activities that happen prior to rulemaking or pre-rulemaking activities that we do, but it's actually the unified agenda that determines an official rulemaking is underway. And if you go to the current unified agenda, you'll find that there are 2 rulemakings that are currently in work. If you can go to the next slide. So the first rulemaking underway is the orbital debris mitigation rule. And this is a rule that has been a long time in work. As a matter of fact, we started this somewhere around 2013. And there were a number of changes as we continue to develop the rule. And one of the largest changes was the publication of Space Policy Directive number 2, which required the space interagencies under NASA's leadership to develop a working group to update the U.S. government orbital debris mitigation standard practices. And the Office of Commercial Space Transportation represented FAA and the Department of Transportation in these working groups. And I'll say we were heavily engaged until the very end. I mean, we were definitely engaged throughout. representing commercial space, noting that space launch vehicles are very different than commercial satellites, and we wanted to make sure that our representation for the commercial space industry was there. The requirements in the Space Policy Directive require that we, the interagency, come together, update the government debris mitigation standard practices, which were issued at the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020. And once those were issued, we re-engaged our rulemaking activity, revived it, and modified it slightly to make the adjustments needed for the orbital debris update that we have. And the goal here of this rulemaking is just what it says on the slide. We needed to bring our rulemaking activities in line with the standard practices. That's not saying that all of the launch operators aren't already meeting them. A lot of times, if it's a NASA mission, you're contractually required to meet the debris mitigation standard practices. But this will level the playing field. This will also ensure that all of our missions, commercial space missions, meet the requirements necessary. So this is pretty far along. I expect in the spring, the NPRM should be released for this rulemaking. And I briefed this rule already to COMSTAC once before, or at least the concepts of orbital mitigation. I don't think there'll be many shockers, considering the public orbital debris mitigation standard practices are already out there. So we can go to the next slide. The second rulemaking that AST is undertaking that we already have a rulemaking number for is the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act Incorporation. So the CSLCA had a number of inputs to the commercial space industry regulatory regime. And this rulemaking is specifically designed to just meet those congressional or statutory requirements. We're looking at the definitions of space launch and reentry vehicles. One of the things that came out is if you have a permit and you go to a license, can you retain your permit? Well, this law says you can, and so therefore we need to change the regulations. We also need to update regulations regarding government astronauts as identified in the law. So this is a legislatively triggered rulemaking activity, and this has received a number, and so it's moving along pretty quickly. I expect also next year the NPRM will go out. I don't expect that this one will be a shocker. The goal here is to align the regulations with the law. It's not going to delve very far from that, and so I think the review for this should be fairly easy in those regards. These are the two rulemakings that have already received rulemaking numbers. Today, we've already discussed a few things that I'll call over the horizon for the regulatory environment. And the administrator already mentioned that we're going to be working on 440, financial responsibility. We are also going to have to tackle human spaceflight because the learning period is expected to end sometime. And so that continues to be on our horizon, or just over our horizon, I should say, for rulemaking, as well as the 420, which is spaceports, or licensed sites, is also over the horizon. So those are the types of activities, those over the regulatory horizon, that you can expect to see AST looking for input on, starting to discuss before we actually get into the formal rulemaking committee. Which brings me to my next slide, which is a new thing. This is the aerospace rulemaking committees. And the FAA has long had aviation rulemaking committees. And these are rulemaking committees of aviation specialists. They evaluate issues that could result in rulemaking and provide advice to the administrator about those. It's authorized in Part 49, which is the transportation regulator law under the FAA. It's explicit. It's just unique to the FAA. And it is not part of the FACA. So it doesn't apply the FACA rules. Some of the restrictions that we have for COMSTAC in general don't apply to an aviation rulemaking committee. And what happened recently was the law was updated to add an aerospace rulemaking committee. And the acronym AR or ASRC doesn't work. So we are just calling them SPARCs, a space rulemaking committee, a SPARC. And these rulemaking committees differ slightly from an aviation rulemaking committee. An aviation rulemaking committee, it's for aviation, it's designated by the administrator. But a Spark or an aerospace rulemaking committee, it's for commercial space transportation, and it's designated by the Secretary of Transportation. And so the administrator has already mentioned earlier this morning that we're going to start a Spark for the 440 financial responsibility. And the process is develop a charter, get it to the authority who is authorizing, and the ARCs, that would be the administrator. For the Spark, that will be the secretary. Once the charter is approved, then the working group teams will be established, and these will be teams of diverse areas. The goal here is to set up a committee that includes current and prospective license and permitting holders. For the 440 specifically, we will be looking at insurance providers, customers, launch and reentry customers, academia, public, as well as U.S. government participation. So it's a diverse group. And then the goal of both the Aviation Rulemaking Committee and the Space Rulemaking Committee, or the Spark, is to take advantage of the industry's technical expertise and to get broad input, public and industry, into the rulemaking process before we delve too hard into the rulemaking. And so I think that the Sparks will be, as we refine how we're going, this will be the first one. So we can't give you a whole lot of details, except for the fact that we expect this to follow the same type of activities that we did for the aviation rulemaking committees. It'll just be focused on commercial space and not so much on aviation. And as we go along the way, I expect to see more Sparks after the 440 for things that are, again, over the regulatory horizon, human space flight, spaceports. Those are the types of things that I expect. And this will give us, the industry, an opportunity, as well as the public, to provide those types of comments that don't fit in the FACA COMSTAC arena, where we have a very structured back and forth for advice to the secretary. I think that the ability of the Spark will be much greater, and I think it'll be a welcome addition to our rulemaking activities. I think that's my last slide, but I'll answer any questions that people have on either the existing rulemakings, the Horizon, or the Aerospace Rulemaking Committee. Mike French, you had a question? Or Mike Moses, either one.
Oh, go ahead. It's Moses. Go ahead, Mike Moses.
Okay, too many mics trying to talk at once.
Yeah.
Steph, thank you for that. That's actually super helpful. For the rulemaking committees, is that also the forum where you would be able to discuss kind of what the landscape of rulemaking would look like? Is it kind of a help, not just the roadmap to how to get there, but what that area looks like when you do get there?
Yes, I think it would. Again, so this is the rulemaking committees go much farther than what we would normally do, and just an answer, is this good? You can propose different alternatives and evaluate, and the team can break up into subgroup working groups to handle specific portions of, say, the financial responsibility or the spaceports. You can actually break it up. So there is a lot of flexibility in the Spark process. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mike French?
Yeah, and somewhat related. Wonder, is there need to be a formal, can you have a Spark? Does a Spark necessarily mean the formal opening or beginning of a rulemaking on a related topic? So for example, could a Spark exist that then decides there isn't a need for a rulemaking, to take place, or are they necessarily linked?
No, so you're correct. They don't have to result in a rulemaking if the group, now obviously the rulemaking is in the name of the Spark. So the goal here is to address an issue that we know is going to require a rule change. And so this is really the best forum for that. If we know that the regulations are either inadequate, or we don't expect them to keep up, or there could just be a massive change needed in the way we're addressing something, and we think that it's going to require a rulemaking to make that happen, that's when a Spark is. I don't think we would use a Spark for something that we didn't think that there might be, but that doesn't mean that the Spark couldn't say the rules are fine as they are now. We don't think there's a problem with the rules. They may say we want to update Title 51. There's no limitation on the advice that the Spark could provide. But the goal is to kind of tackle those things that are over the horizon and give the industry and public a chance to weigh in. But you're correct. It doesn't have to result in a rulemaking.
Thanks. It's very helpful to understand. Thank you.
I thought I saw a flash of a hand up, but maybe not.
Shanna Dale, I believe, has her hand up.
Oh, Shanna.
Hey, I'm trying to start my video. Okay. Hey, I wanted to ask, and Steph, this may be you or somebody else, but in regards to timing, we're going to discuss today draft recommendations in regards to 440. And obviously, we're also going to address Sparks and recommended organizations for insurance reform and also human spaceflight regulations. So today it really is just draft recommendations on 440 that we're going to be discussing. I guess I'm a little bit concerned about timing. The reason why we're in draft recommendations are we got some really good feedback that I think needs to be incorporated into recommendations from COMSTAC, and they included some issues that were raised by Steve Lindsay at Sierra Space. That was really good input, and also some great input from Karina and Jim Muncie. Not necessarily a position of Commercial Spaceflight Federation, but just, collecting some input from the various spaceports. And what I'm trying to get at is timing in regards to making final recommendations at the next COMSTAC public meeting. And will we be out of phase or, still in the mix? Since, how soon is the spark for 440, that kind of stuff? That's what I'm interested in.
So that's actually a good question, Shanna. And it's one that we're really trying to work, because we still have to abide by the Administrative Procedures Act. So we still have some limitations on the way we work, but we can have the COMSTAC recommendations come in, and they will help inform how we handle the Space Rulemaking Committee, the Spark. So if we get recommendations now that we can actually incorporate into the tasks that we want the Spark to handle, we can do that. But I will also offer that we can, because of the way we have some flexibility in the Spark, we can engage the Spark while the Spark is going. We can engage it with, if COMSTAC comes up with a follow-on issue that needs to be addressed, we can add that to the Spark requirements or workload at any time. As a matter of fact, we can even go back and reconvene part of the Spark, just the way you can reconvene part of the ARC to address those issues. So, but your question on timing is one that we're constantly trying to work, because we have to request a rulemaking from OMB, and that actually starts the formal process. And we are allowed to have the Spark carry over into that, but it starts to limit how much participation we can have into the process. And so we're trying to balance this out so that the COMSTAC recommendations, the Spark charter and creation and work, and then the official rulemaking all kind of, it's heavy COMSTAC Spark, and then things should start dwindling down as we narrow the trade space to the rulemaking. Because when we request a rulemaking number, what we're doing is we're giving a scope. So we can't, once we request that, it becomes very difficult to add something else to the rulemaking scope. And so all of the COMSTAC and Spark work really need to be done before we can actually go forward with our rulemaking number request, because that's going to define the scope of the rulemaking that we have. So I expect that we will see more work in Spark and COMSTAC prior to us ever requesting the rulemaking number and defining the scope of that. And so it'll be a decision that AST has to make, that we have enough information to define the scope to request this. We know we need it. Obviously, financial responsibility is one where we know we need it. But all the information before that, it helps us define that scope.
Thanks, Steph. Really appreciate that.
Steph, regarding the orbital debris mitigation rulemaking, is that numbered? I don't think I caught if it was numbered or not.
As in, does it have a part number? It
Correct.
will once it gets issued, but yeah, it's an individual part. I think subject to change, it could be 453, I think. But then again, that is just going through its final phases. And so I don't, the numbers could change. I don't think the information will change in it. And as the format gets better, I'm good at putting down a lot of information, and then other people are very good at taking that information and putting it in the right format. The indentations just kill me.
Okay, got it. Also, how is this orbital debris mitigation rulemaking either aligned with, overlaps with the FCC's further notice of proposed rulemaking on orbital debris mitigation?
So I think that what the word we would like to use here is dovetails with the FCC's regulations. And so we constantly work with the FCC to make sure that what we don't have is a big gap between our authorities and debris mitigation activities. And so when we taking the launch vehicle in the upper stage, and then they're taking the payloads, and then we've got a little bit of gray area in there as launch vehicles start to do more things, specifically upper stages. And we're in constant dialogue with the FCC for every mission that we launch as part of our payload review. And one of the discussions in that is orbital debris mitigation requirements. And so I believe that there won't be overlap with the FCC. I think that there is a dovetail in our oversight with the FCC, and the orbital debris rule will make that dovetail more seamless with respect to the requirements. Our requirements will look much more similar to the FCC requirements and the same processes. Yep.
So is there an ongoing interagency working group on this still?
It's not an ongoing, I would say we have a constant dialogue with the FCC with regards to this. And usually it's triggered by a specific mission. And then we'll have a discussion with the FCC about that specific mission to make sure that what we have is an understanding of where our authorities and their authorities and what questions we have back and forth.
I'm scanning for any other questions for staff, and I see none. Thank you so much for your remarks today, staff, and
Thanks.
all your support. Thank you.
All right, again, thank you, staff. I greatly appreciate it. And folks, you can tell he is an absolute expert in so many areas, orbital debris, and I am very fortunate to have him as my assistant manager. So again, thank you, staff. Next, I've asked Pam Underwood, who is the Director of the Office of Spaceports. So I'm going to just give a quick update on the spaceports. So Pam, if you are available, we'll turn it over to you. And as she's coming up, just a note, the question link is available, and we've started to receive some questions. So if you do have questions out there, if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to click on that link and enter any questions that you have.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jim. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to update COMSTAC this morning on the Office of Spaceports. We have a few activities that I wanted to make sure the membership is aware of. A lot of exciting things going on. Do we have the slide presentation? Super, thank you so much. And again, as Jim mentioned, my name is Pam Underwood. I'm the Director of the Office of Spaceports. First thing I wanted to make COMSTAC aware of this morning is a spaceport security review. Everyone in this industry knows that space is growing global and a very exciting time in our industry. To make sure that we're ready, we need to make sure that our spaceports have the infrastructure, the stability, and the information to be ready for this type of growth. So what we were doing is the FAA is working with the FBI in a joint effort. The FAA Office of Security and Hazardous Material Safety and FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation, specifically the Office of Spaceports, are working together to do this assessment of security at our nation's spaceports. These reviews will include looking at counterintelligence, cybersecurity, and threat assessments for our nation's spaceports. What we want to accomplish is providing a document, a list of best practices for spaceport safety. The FBI and the FAA recently undertook this type of activity for our airports, and it seemed logical with the growing industry we have for commercial space to do this now for our spaceports. Again, we'd like to have some type of a document, some type of a recommendations that our spaceports and prospective spaceports can take and put into practice on matters relevant to security. Initially, this will focus on the current FAA licensed spaceports. It will include on-site reviews as well as after or before assessments and threat assessments. We intend on starting these reviews in January of 2022. Given the number of spaceports we have and the time it will take to complete a review, this might take 12 to 18 months to complete in totality. But what I'm working on with the FAA and FBI is to try to have a rolling list of best practices as a review per spaceport is done, so that we can all learn as this assessment is underway. But it's a really exciting time. We're looking forward to getting this underway, and we appreciate the spaceport's participation in this activity. I have briefed the CSF Spaceport Committee on this and got very welcome comments. So I look forward to your participation. And of course, we will let COMSTAC know as this review commences and what the findings are accordingly. Next chart, please. As I mentioned before, there's a growing global market for our industry. And what we're seeing is a growing number of US launch vehicle operators are seeking customers overseas. This is also leading to a number of international governments, international spaceports that are having proposed US launches of US vehicle operators. So what we'd like to do in the Office of Spaceports and are currently very active with is working with these international governments and international spaceports on the items listed on this chart here. What would be great for the industry is that we as governments can have consistent regulations and safety practices for these activities. This promotes interoperability for our industry and is critical as we continue to grow as a global industry. Additionally, government to government, we have a unique opportunity here to cooperate to stop any or avoid duplication of licensing efforts. If we get consistent approaches and regulations, then it's up to the government entities involved to take it a step further and try to avoid duplication. Duplication of licensing does not increase safety. What we want to do is make sure we uphold safety, but work together as international governments to try to streamline the activity so that we're focused on safety, but not stifling for this growing global industry. And finally, if we look to the future, what we'd ultimately like to look at is some type of international recognition models for licensing of commercial space. We'd like to take what the aviation industry has done in flight standards and aircraft certification and look to see what would that look like for commercial space? What can we do in that area? That would be the ultimate way of reducing duplication. Some laws might need to change in our country and others in order to really fulfill that end state vision. But I think as a starting point, the cooperation we have and the dialogue between our governments and these international spaceports is a great start and a good place for our industry to support it growing on a global level. And a final chart for you and everyone in this call is just some additional information about the Office of Spaceports. If you have not looked at our website, there's great information about our domestic spaceports, in particular, a Spaceports by State website, which is the first collection documenting all of the nation's capabilities of our spaceports. It's a start at somewhat of an airport facility directory for spaceports. And we appreciate all the spaceports' participation in providing the information. We do great efforts to try to make sure this information does not come stale and is a good resource for our industry. I appreciate everyone's time this morning and welcome any questions from the COMSTAC.
Just perusing for questions here, Pam. I don't
Oh.
see any. Oh, go ahead, Karina.
I'll ask a quick question. And Pam, thanks so much for this briefing, especially because you're clearly not feeling well. I hope
My
you're
voice
feeling
is
better.
not very good this morning.
So, and as you mentioned, you did brief a lot of that information to the Spaceports Committee at CSF, and really appreciate it. Having been at a spaceport for nearly 10 years, we had a great relationship with local security officials, local FBI, and I believe that's the case really for a lot of spaceports. I'm curious, what would you see, and please feel free to be brief and save your voice, because every spaceport is going to be different. You're most likely every assessment you get from the FBI and other security officials will be different per spaceport. Where do you kind of see that evolving? So if that is the case, where they have very specific recommendations, do you feel like that's going to help set up like general security practices for licensed spaceports, or how do you see that evolving?
And that's a great point, Karina. And by the way, don't worry about my voice. I've got kids and dogs to yell at, so it's going to be fine. But thank you. But so, I agree, each spaceport review is going to be very unique to that individual spaceport. As I've noted to the FBI, and by the way, for the FBI, except for the local office, as you mentioned, the FBI is a headquarters engaging with spaceports. This is new for them. So I've educated them on some of our spaceports are co-located with airports. So some of that airport security will be beneficial for the spaceport, and things such as that. Sometimes, as you know, Karina, security could be customer driven. There might be some government customers at certain spaceports that would require certain security that other spaceports hadn't put in place. So you're right, the recommendations will probably be very unique. So what I would anticipate is, what I have encouraged the FBI and the FAA team to do is to have a rolling list of spaceport recommendations. It's going to take so long to get through this that we'll need to make sure that we get the information out, because we could be educating our other spaceports that haven't gone yet by what the ones that have gone through. However, because they're going to be so specific, until we see the final, all the results, will we really be able to try to wrap it up into general security recommendations for spaceports? So I think that initially the product might look very spaceport specific, because I'm encouraging them to share practices. I'm not sure that's going to be a publicly available document. I'll have to find out from the FBI and the spaceports if they'd like to, but my goal is to at least share it amongst spaceport directors so they can benefit from those that have been executed during the ongoing review. At the end, though, I would like to see us roll up into some general security. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that. But you're right, Karina, a lot of them could be very specific, and it will require us as a team to try to figure out what could to be overarching recommendations for the group.
Thank you. Thanks, Pam.
Mm-hmm.
Pam, this is more of an offering, but if you haven't already talked to the Space ISAC, there might be some interesting overlap there. It is an industry-focused participation for cybersecurity practices in space.
Thank you, Charity. That's a great recommendation, and we have not, but I will definitely include that. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Pam. Appreciate you being here and giving an update on spaceports.
All right, and I echo that, Pam. Thank you so much. And with that, that ends the FAA's update to COMSTAC. Of course, we will be here to answer any questions. So from COMSTAC members, you can ask questions at any time. And if you are watching or participating through YouTube, you can click on that link and ask questions there. We are getting a few in, and we will put those into COMSTAC or answer those at the appropriate time, dealing with that topic as we go forward. So with that, Charity, Karina, I want to turn this over to you. And if you would, go ahead and take it away as the COMSTAC. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you for everyone for joining us today in this November 2021 COMSTAC meeting. I first want to start off by thanking Administrator Dixon, Associate Administrator Monteith, and Deputy Associate Administrator Coleman for your remarks and your leadership. And to our speakers today, Randy Repchak, Charles Hewitt, Steph Earle, and Pam Underwood. A big thanks to our illustrious DFO, Jim Hatt, and the excellent support from Jim Vendetti and Tara Halt. Now, it can be difficult to assess a particular moment when we, as a space community, enter a new phase of achievement or a new era, level of maturity. Usually these things are a continuum. Difficult to pinpoint an exact moment, but I'd like to go out on a limb here and say we have just passed that inflection point. I say this because the conversations in this community are starting to change. Large constellation conversations are and must be accompanied by space sustainability conversations. Launch discussions are accompanied by destinations, whether that be re-entry at a new spaceport or private space station. And it's not only the fact that private crewed spaceflight is happening in both suborbital and orbital missions, but that it is accompanied with a continuous number of milestones where lawyers, engineers, policy professionals, actors, entrepreneurs, science communicators, and more are now experiencing what only government professionals have had access to: space. This inflection has been years in the making. Investments of 5 and 10 years ago are now literally taking flight. So I see our role here at COMSTAC, our inputs and our votes today, as a measure to help shepherd in this new era in a safe and sustainable way. To think through the key commercial space transportation issues that are just beyond the horizon and offer expert insight into what FAA needs to do to encourage, facilitate, promote, and yes, to regulate this industry in a manner that brings safety and certainty, ensures compliance, and will keep us on this path of growth. Members, thank you for stepping up to the plate and once again preparing these upcoming recommendations and inputs on key issues of human spaceflight, spaceports, electronic licensing, and more. I'd like to hand it over to Karina briefly, and I look forward to an excellent dialogue and productive session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Charity. I don't have prepared remarks. I just wanted to echo a couple of things that Charity mentioned. We've seen over the past 6 months some significant milestones and achievements in the industry. And we've seen some things play out in real time as COMSTAC has discussed some of the taskers that were proposed by AST. This really caused us to work up until really this morning on providing some of this input back to the full COMSTAC out for public comment as well. So I just wanted to say thanks and echo thanks from what Charity had mentioned to this full COMSTAC and all of your tireless work up until the very last moment. And we will be asking more, but hopefully not as many taskers for this next 6 months. And again, I think this growth of the industry is again a real testament to what's happening in the industry, what's happening in space. Some quick numbers just for data purposes. Space Capital published some space investment information, which indicates more than $230 billion has been invested in more than 1,600 unique companies worldwide over the past 10 years. We're starting to see more investment, more venture capital interest, more companies going public. And to me, this is a real testament that the industry has gotten a lot of validation in the investment community. We are seeing Earth observation companies, more of those come online, spacecraft manufacturers come online. We're seeing the increased cadence, obviously, that AST has mentioned early on. And I think it's even more important that the regulatory environment is right, just as Charity mentioned, that it both encourages safety and innovation, that we can continue to encourage more of these companies to come online. So thanks again, Charity. I know this was a huge undertaking, especially this past year for you personally as well. And thank you so much for your leadership here at COMSTAC. I'll go through quickly. So we're going to take a break here in just a moment, but I wanted to go through some logistics when we come back from the break. So following the break, we're going to take roll and introduce the COMSTAC members. And then we will ask each of the working group leads to introduce each of their taskers and brief the COMSTAC with their recommendations on each tasker. Following any discussion by the COMSTAC members, I will ask each working group lead to make a motion on each of the recommendations they would like voted on, just to make sure we're capturing the full recommendation. And then I will call on each COMSTAC member individually to ensure that we're capturing everyone's vote. So when we come back from the break, we'll first hear from the safety working group, then followed by the regulatory working group, and finally the innovation and infrastructure working group before we move on to other business. So we look forward to seeing everyone back. And Jim, what time did you want everyone to come back from the break? I believe it's 10:45.
Yes, I think that'll be, or
do you want to come back at 11? Are we taking a 30-minute break now?
why don't we just take the 15-minute break now?
Perfect. 10:45.
Perfect.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you, and we will continue on. Charity?
Thank you, Jim. I'd welcome COMSTAC members to turn their cameras on if you're comfortable with that. And we will go through introductions of who we are. I'll kick it off and then hand it over to Karina for the remainder. You all know me. Hi, I'm Charity Whedon. I'm the current COMSTAC Chair and Vice President of Global Space Policy and Government Relations for Astroscale US. Karina, over to you.
Thanks so much, Charity. Karina Dries, I'm the President of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation and your COMSTAC Vice Chair this year. I will call on everyone alphabetically by last name, if that helps a little bit with preparation. Jim Armour.
Good morning, everybody. Jim Armour, retired Air Force of 35 years, 11 years in industry, and now doing some consulting and happy to be a part of the COMSTAC.
Thank you, Jim. Greg Autry.
Hi, I'm Greg Autry. I'm a clinical professor of space leadership, business, and policy at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, Arizona State University. And I'm proud to have been studying and researching in the commercial space industry for 20 years now.
Thank you, Greg. Bill Beckman.
Good morning. I'm Bill Beckman. I'm the Director of Business Development for Boeing in doing the NASA Systems portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Ed Bolton.
Hello, I'm Ed Bolton, and I'm retired.
All right, thank you, Ed. Shanna Dale.
Hi, and following in Ed's footsteps, I'm retired as well, NASA and other places. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanna. Paul Dampus, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Paul Danfus, Vice President of Business Development for Calspan Holdings.
Thank you, Paul. Mary Lynn Dittmar.
Hi, I'm not retired. I'm Mary Lynn Dittmar, and I'm Executive Vice President for Axiom Space. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Mike French.
Hi, Mike French. I'm the Vice President for Space Systems at the Aerospace Industries Association. Thanks.
Good morning, Mike. Chris Hassler. Is Chris with us? There you are. Chris, your mute's still on. There you go.
There. How's that?
Great.
Good. I'm a former naval officer, and I spent time in industry with Lockheed and Northrop Grumman. Now I'm the owner and founder of a company known as Syndetics, and we provide consulting services across multiple areas, including space and surveillance activities in the intel community to the major top 10 defense and intel contractors.
Thank you, Chris. Dale Ketchum.
Good morning, Dale Ketchum. I'm with Space Florida and happy to be a participant.
Kate Cronmiller.
Hi, I'm Kate Cronmiller. I'm Vice President of Government Relations for Jacobs. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you, Kate. Steve Lindsay.
Yeah, Steve Lindsay. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer, Senior Vice President for Advanced Technology and Advanced Programs for Sierra Space, Air Force and NASA background.
Thank you, Steve. Mike Moses.
Hey, good morning. I am Mike Moses with Virgin Galactic, President of Space Missions and Safety.
Morning, Mike. Clay Mowry.
Hi, Clay Maury. I'm Vice President of Global Sales with Blue Origin.
Dale Nash. Let's see, do we have Dale? Dale, your mute's on.
Okay, Dale Nash, mostly retired. Thank you.
All right, good morning, Dale. Sharon Pinkerton.
Sharon added to the chat. She is present.
Great, thank you, Sharon. Lee Rosen.
Hi, Lee Rosen, Vice President of Customer Operations and Integration at SpaceX. Hope all you guys are doing great. It's been a good meeting so far.
Thanks, Lee. Robbie Sabatier.
Good morning, Robbie Sabatier, Vice President of Government Operations and Strategic Communications with United Launch Alliance, and I have about 20 years in the launch business. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. Eric Stallmer.
Hi, good morning. Eric Stallmer. I'm Executive Vice President of Voyage. Everyone this morning.
Thanks, Eric. Ann Zikolski.
Good morning. Ann Zikolski, Vice President for Commercial Civil Space at Lockheed Martin.
Thanks, Ann. Okay, Charity, back to you.
Thank you, Karina, and welcome everyone again. I'm going to hand it over to Greg Autry and Robbie Sabatier to present the Safety Working Group taskers, recommendations, and findings. Over to you.
Thank you, Charity. Thank you, Karina, and thank you for everybody at the COMSTAC for attending today and for helping us out with our taskers this year. Can we get our slides up? Great. We're providing an update today on human spaceflight industry volunteer consensus standards and a couple of taskers that were assigned to us earlier in the year. Next slide, please. So our first tasker was to look at a number of documents that were on the AST website that provide guidance to applicants who were carrying spaceflight participants. It was noted that these documents were out of date. We went through and reviewed the documents, or that was our task, and were asked to submit final recommendations or revisions to the COMSTAC for this meeting. Those documents are available to anyone at the URL noted there. And there were specifically 4 human spaceflight related documents in the guidance section, which were called out to us. One was a human spaceflight checklist from 2008 that is particularly out of date. Guidance on informing crew and spaceflight participants from 2017. The guidance for medical screening of commercial aerospace passengers going back to March 2003. And draft guidelines for commercial suborbital reusable launch vehicle operations with spaceflight participants from 2005. Next slide. A second tasker was added later this summer, and basically the FAA has an update due to Congress next March regarding human spaceflight safety standards and the progress in the industry. There was an interim report sent in 2019, and the COMSTAC just wanted to be informed of what has changed since that report. Next slide. The safety working group consulted with our members, but we also reached out to human spaceflight operators that were not on the safety working group or represented on our group, as well as ASTM F-47. And in particular, I want to thank Andrew Nelson for his assistance there. We all reviewed the guidance documents on the FAA website and provided a detailed markup in some Microsoft Word documents. These documents were then distributed to the safety working group and the human spaceflight operating companies that weren't represented on our group for comment. And after that, we forwarded to the full COMSTAC. We will make these documents available to the public. So essentially, you've got the original documents with Microsoft Word markup comments, and then we'll anonymize the source of those comments in the documents that are public. Next. In February 2020, the COMSTAC submitted a report on the state of human spaceflight industry voluntary consensus standards. That report concluded that the industry-led standards have yielded progress, and the pace has been insufficient, however, to inform the development of a regulatory environment. It is important for those that might be joining us here from the public that are deeply embedded in these issues to understand that a 2004 law that came out of Congress, the Commercial Spaceflight Launch Amendments, established a learning period, sometimes referred to as moratorium, although there are those who don't like that word, that essentially told FAA not to regulate the safety of the spaceflight participants or passengers in these vehicles at this time, so that there could be time for the industry to develop best practices, and that when regulatory rules were put in place, that these rules would in fact add value rather than lock in potentially less safe standards that nobody was fully cognizant of their long-term implications. So we're going through that learning period. It has been extended a few times. The current end of that learning period is set for October 1st, 2023. So FAA, of course, wants to be ready, and Congress wants FAA to be ready should that deadline not be extended. There are also other circumstances under which FAA is permitted to regulate. So FAA leadership is needed to facilitate rapid progress on the human spaceflight safety framework, and published voluntary safety standards are in minimal use by the commercial space industry, but several should be investigated by the FAA's potential input. So there's several organizations that have been looking at this. That doesn't mean that industry is using them right now. Again, we're in that learning period, and the operators, as noted, just finally got off the ground really this year. It's an exciting time to be in this industry. And I know that it was a really, really busy time for the people that are doing this work and people on our group. So I appreciate that. The FAA is required to provide to Congress a report by March 2022, identifying appropriate activities for establishing and implementing human spaceflight safety framework. In support of that, the COMSTAC provides this update on the progress of the human spaceflight industry consensus standards since the 2020 report. Next slide. All right, here are observations. And again, I want to thank everybody on the safety working group, and in particular, my co-chair, Robbie Sabathier. Since September 2020, the human spaceflight industry has gained significant experience. 3 operators have conducted licensed human spaceflight launches. That has been so exciting to see this year. As Charity noted, I agree, this is the tipping point year, and it's hard to miss it in the media. When my extended family members all suddenly think what I do is cool and exciting, I know something different is happening. 3 missions have flown with commercial spaceflight participants. That is super exciting. I hope to be one of them someday. Several standard organizations have been involved in furthering commercial spaceflight standards. This is important to note. We looked at work by the American National Standards Institute, ANSI. We looked at work from the International Standards Organization, ISO. And AIAA led US organizations for ISO space standards development is important. Next slide. In particular, though, as we noted, ASTM's International Committee on Commercial Spaceflight, F47, has been working diligently and methodically on spaceflight standards. Michael Lopez Alegria, the former co-chair of this body, the COMSTAC, has been working there. And as I noted with Andrew Nelson, whose work we supported, they've done a lot of good work there, and we drew heavily from that. The details are listed here. I won't read them all off to you. Next slide. The International Association for the Advancement of Spaceflight Safety, IAASS, has also published a report, and they did a lot of detailed work on that, and we took a look at what they had to say as well. To be clear, that US contributions to that have been primarily from government stakeholders, and there's been less commercial industry input onto that. Next slide. So we found that multiple industry groups have been involved in furthering commercial spaceflight standards over the last year since we last reported, though only ASTM has actively enhanced the development of the standards. Their work has been exemplary. While HFSF standard development has accelerated, a great deal of progress is still needed to enable self-regulation of the industry. The speed of standards development has been challenged by the rapid and expanding workload of lean commercial human spaceflight companies placing competing demands on resources. So these companies, as noted, are super busy. They are not large government organizations with thousands of employees and contractors. They're very lean, tight organizations. The need to communicate and negotiate consensus across a large and diverse array of stakeholders, not only the commercial spaceflight operators, but aviation veterans, academics, and aspiring human spaceflight companies all have an interest in what happens here. Finally, even with a maturing collection of human spaceflight standards, rulemaking will be necessary element of establishing a safety framework upon expiration of the industry learning period, whenever that should happen. And I want to be clear here that there's no consensus from industry on when they would like that to happen or whether they think we're at that point or not, but it's FAA's job to be prepared for whatever decisions Congress makes in that regard. Next slide. FAA continues to support the ASTM F47 and development of the human spaceflight industry voluntary standards is our first recommendation. Our second recommendation is that FAA accept the Safety Working Group's comments and recommendations on the guidance documents. Again, those are detailed list of markups in Word documents designed to update those documents on the website and keep them current with what's actually in the regulation, particularly what's happening with Part 450. As well as input from the industry on what they'd like to see in any future regulatory environment should that emerge. FAA will coordinate with ASTM F47 and the other standard bodies as appropriate on plans for future guidance documents. This would help focus industry standards efforts to accelerate progress and avoid duplication with FAA activities. So it's important that what's going on out there with these organizations coordinate with what FAA is doing and that we end up as in sync as possible. In support of future rulemaking, FAA should utilize the proposed Space Rulemaking Committee, which was mentioned in our last report, to inform human spaceflight guidance documents that need assessment and prioritization. And is there one more slide or are we done? That's it. So I guess, Charity, it would be incumbent upon us to have discussion, and then we can go back and ask if the COMSTAC would like to approve the recommendation or not. Now, I know in particular, Mike Moses, you had a comment that you wanted to make regarding some wording from the documents internally about the way that NASA has ambiguously phrased a couple of things regarding human spaceflight standards.
Yeah, Greg, thanks. I know, and I've been reviewing these documents for months, and I just finally caught something last night that I thought was worthy of bringing up and discussing as a group. The word certification in my background from NASA land certainly means one thing, but in the FAA, on the aviation side, it has sometimes a much stricter meaning, as it refers to airline type certification and what can be a very specific set of design, build, manufacturing standards and compliance. And I think with an upcoming Spark to go talk about what human rating and human occupant safety rules apply as they apply to commercial spaceflight from the FAA, we should probably just be cautious of using the word certification. So 2 of these documents and the comments and edits from the safety working group are specifically calling out FAA certification of human occupancy. And my suggestion would be that we change that to qualification rather than certification, to allow the Spark to go decide exactly what the regs look like, and then determine whether that constitutes a certification or an endorsement or a qualification, whatever the word should be. But I just didn't want to prematurely convey that we think a certification standard, just particularly with the weight that word sometimes brings, should be applied. And it's in two of the documents.
Duly noted there, Mike. Does anybody else have any input or comment on Mike's concern there?
Yeah, Greg, I don't know if you can hear me.
I can, Clay.
Yeah, so I just wanted to echo Mike's comments and support what he said. So I appreciate how he phrased it, and we support what he's saying.
And Greg, this is Steve. I support what Mike said as well. Got to be careful with the wording.
Great. Yeah, you can't transfer terminology from one agency to another without going through a translation process. Does anybody argue against that?
Well, I'm not arguing against it. I'm arguing for it as well, Greg. I think the words matter, and they're good words. And in this early kind of phase of human spaceflight, taking a kind of a slow approach, seeing how things develop before we overregulate is really important too.
Thank you, Lee. Robbie, do you have any comments on Mike's input or anything broader that you want to add?
No, I'm in favor of it. I do believe the submitted materials distinguish between the meaning of aircraft certification and the intent of this, but I think that it's absolutely fine to go forward with Mike's proposed suggestion.
All right. If there's no objections, then I'd like to modify our documents to reflect specifically Mike's comments and make sure they're recorded there before we release them to the public.
Thanks, Greg. And then I had one other comment, which I think Steph kind of took care of, which was to kind of lay out the framework of, as we move into a Spark, kind of defining what that is actually going to be. What is the actual framework for human occupant safety standards? But based on his explanation earlier today, it sounds like that's exactly the intent of the Spark, is to be able to go pre-rulemaking, define what that landscape looks like. So I think he kind of took my second comment off the table, but I just wanted to echo thanks for that great explanation of what the Spark process is. I know we've all, many of us have been involved in the ARC for the 450, and there was lots of learning on both sides. And I think this is a great change to help make that a little smoother process as we go forward.
I agree. And perhaps if there's work left to be done there and that defining the Spark, that might be one of our taskers that FAA might throw at us before the next meeting. Other thoughts or comments from the COMSTAC?
Greg, I just wanted to thank the safety working group for putting so much time and effort into this tasker. I think there was a lot of involvement, and that was helpful to all of us, I think, involved, and wanted to praise AST for really being proactive in getting industry's input on the existing human spaceflight guidance documents. I think our input is valued. And this will only serve our industry and the human spaceflight kind of regulatory landscape going forward. So hats off to the safety working group. And Greg, I think working with you, whether you're in Dubai or on the West Coast or in space, we seem to always get it done and over the finish line. And so I enjoy our partnership and working together, and look forward to working on the space rulemaking committee for human spaceflight regulatory reform, or whatever our next tasker is. So always enjoy working with you. Thank you.
Same there. And I want to thank Mike Moses at Virgin and Jane there as well for going an extra mile of digging in. And I know, again, everybody's been really busy, and a lot of this came a little bit down to the wire, which is my first choice. And thank you, Charity and Karina, for making sure things moved along there. Are there any other comments, concerns, or additions from anybody before we consider voting on the recommendation?
Just a quick note from me as a member of the safety working group, just to thank the chairs who I know have been involved in quite a heavy lift here. So thank you for all of your help moving this along.
Thank you. And it's great to see the exciting things that you're doing with Axiom as now.
I echo what Marilyn said as well. And Robbie, you and ULA certainly added some resources to help with all the documents, which that part's not easy. So thank you.
We have a team, Mike.
Okay, anyone else? Well, without any further comment, then Charity, I guess we can conduct a vote on the recommendation.
Yeah, I'd recommend we put the page with the recommendations up and
Yes,
have
please.
a formal
Get that again.
vote. Yeah.
And Greg, if it's safe to assume that you're making the motion for the recommendation you're presenting, if we could get a second, and then I'll do a roll call on the vote.
I make the motion. Somebody volunteered a second.
This is Dale Ketchum. I'll second.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Do we want to display it first, or I'll
Yes,
go
please.
ahead? Yeah.
Let's give everybody a minute or two to look at it.
Okay.
Who's running the slides? So I won't read this again, but let's give everybody 2 minutes to digest it.
And also noting the change that Mike suggested for the term certification.
Right.
Okay, if we're ready, I can start to do the roll call here. So we've got a motion from Greg Autry, a second from Dale Ketchum, and I will call on everyone again alphabetically by last name. Jim Armour,
I vote aye.
Bill Beckman,
Yes.
Ed Bolton,
Aye.
Shanna Dale,
Aye.
Paul Dampus,
Aye.
Mary Lynn Dittmar,
Aye.
Mike French,
Aye.
Chris Hassler. Chris?
Aye.
Thank you. Let's see, Kate Cromiller,
Aye.
Steve Lindsay,
Aye.
Mike Moses,
Aye.
Clay Mowry,
Aye.
Dale Nash,
Aye.
Sharon Pinkerton.
Aye.
Thank you, Sharon. Lee Rosen,
Aye.
Robbie Sabatier,
Aye.
Eric Stallmer,
Aye.
Ann Zakowski,
Aye.
and Vice Chair votes aye. How does the chair vote?
I vote aye.
Great, passes unanimously.
And just want to send my thanks to Robbie and Greg and the entire safety working group for the great work here. Thank you.
Can I make one more comment, Charity?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I'd just like to point out that, this is a diverse and exciting new industry. There's a lot of stress going on and a lot of cooperation and a lot of competition. But I'm honored to be a part of it. And I think this really represents a really impressive act of coming together to recognize that we all want to have a effective, profitable, and safe commercial space flight industry, and one that America will take the lead in to establish an environment in which American companies are globally competitive and provide an incredible new service to the public of the world. So thank you all of you that are out there doing this work daily, not just the people that are here on the COMSTAC, but the people in the trenches that are building these systems, designing these systems, flying and improving them. That's all I have.
So I think next up, we are going to take a break until noon. And after noon, we will start with the regulatory working group. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes, and I do want to remind people who are watching and participating via YouTube that this afternoon, it will be a different link. So there was one link for this morning. There'll be a different link for this afternoon. So please select the second link for the afternoon session of COMSTAC. And also there is a link there for questions. You can type in the questions. We have a few, and I'll bring a couple of those as we get to those topics within COMSTAC. So please go ahead, if you're out there in the public, please feel free to type in questions and we will get to them as we get to those topics. Thank you. So we are adjourned until noon. Thank you.